Hi, welcome. I'm Lori Wolf and I'm with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. I work down in Helena in our education center, which is called Montana Wild. If you're interested in learning more about that, just go online to our FWP website and you can go under education and find us. Before we get started today, I want to give a special thanks to some organizations that helped give money so we could do this project. And that would be the Montana Outdoor Legacy Foundation, the Ortenberg, Claiborne, Tracy, Weyerhaeuser, and the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundations, as well as Cabela's. Without them, we wouldn't be here today. So big thanks to them. And welcome to all of you. I'd also like to introduce you to somebody I work with and who's going to be doing this program with you, and this is Ryan Schmaltz.
Hey guys. All right, to get started, I think, because both Lori and I work at Montana Wild, we're going to ask you a question. First I'll ask Lori. Lori, what do you think the wildest place in Montana is? So I want each of the schools to think about that real quick. You'll give you a few seconds to talk with each other, and we'll ask you what you think the wildest place is in Montana. What's your answer, Lori?
Well, there's a lot of places. When I think of Montana, I think of a lot of wild places, but I'd have to say the wildest place for me is the Rocky Mountain front. It's beautiful, and I just think of it as absolutely wild.
Are they typing or
just
right?
keep talking?
All right.
Oh, let's go to Stevensville.
All right.
Stevensville, unmute your microphone. And what's your wildest place?
The mountains.
Okay, the mountains right outside of Stevensville there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Stevensville. Let's go to Arlie. Arlie, unmute your microphone. What's your wildest place?
The Flathead Indian Reservation.
Ooh, the Flathead Indian Reservation. Good
there.
thinking. Thank you. Let's go ahead to Joliet. If you can unmute your microphone, let us know in your place what's the wildest thing.
What do you guys think?
What?
Wildest place in Montana?
Billy.
Billings.
It can get pretty wild down there, you're right.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what my pick is for the wildest place in Montana. And I'm actually really excited to hear that each school, their response was somewhere near their home. And I grew up in North Dakota, so I'm really partial to the prairies. And my pick for the wildest place in Montana is the Sagebrush Prairie. If you've been to the Sagebrush Prairie, it's something you have to go and feel. It's so wide open, the smell of the sagebrush, all the different kinds of flowers, and you can see for miles. You can see a mountain range 100 miles away, and you're all alone out there with the wildlife that makes this place so wild. This ecosystem is home to the fastest animals that we have in Montana, the toughest animals, most unique, and I think the rarest animals too. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive right into this ecosystem, and we're going to take you on a video tour. And if you recognize the animals that you see while we're taking this virtual tour, just shout them out. So we'd like to hear on your end if you know these animals that you can find in the sagebrush ecosystem. Oh, come on, guys. This is what the activity is about. The sage grouse. All right. So they're here dancing on the lek, you can see, and we'll talk about what a lek is here in a little bit. There's a lot of fighting that goes on at the lek. It's a bull snake. All right. Probably hear this called a sparrowhawk, but it's
My
a...
favorite bird, petrel.
Easy one. Pronghorn.
This is a tough one. It's hard to see. And they do this to keep safe. It's standing up. Yeah, it's a mule deer.
Oh, our state bird. Everyone's got to get this one.
Meadowlark.
Yeah,
Meadowlark.
great.
Good job.
Oh, I heard it. It is sagebrush lizard. Our
Sage
friends
grouse
the
again.
sage grouse again.
Somebody wants to know, what are those things on the sage grouse?
We will talk about all of those adaptations here real soon. So we put this poster up here. It says this sagebrush step, sagebrush step, and the word that I like to use instead of step is prairie, the sagebrush prairie. And when you hear the word prairie, what do you think most of the plants are on the prairie? Have someone unmute a mic and tell us. Grass. It's mostly grass. So we have grass here. So we have grass. Most of the vegetation on the prairie is grass. And because we're talking about the sagebrush prairie, we have grass, native bunch grasses mostly, and then we have a shrub, and the shrub is what?
Everybody?
Sagebrush, yes. And then also really important, you can see all of these flowering plants and things in the background too. Those are forbs, which are really important for sage grouse too. This is an excellent area for grazing livestock, but even more so, this is an excellent habitat for wildlife too. And there's hundreds of different native species that call this area home in this ecosystem, and we're going to talk a little bit about what a niche is. Can someone unmute a mic and tell us what a niche is?
And you need to speak up, students, so we can hear you. What's a niche? Let's go to Arlie. Arlie, what's a niche?
Stop, what's a niche? Yeah, a niche is a species that serves a specific purpose within an ecosystem.
Okay, everybody give Arlie a thumbs up. That was a great answer.
All right. Lori's going to show you an animal, and she'll talk a little bit about that animal's niche.
Okay, this is one of my favorite animals.
Okay, we're going to ask you some questions about this guy. What is it, first of all?
It's a badger.
It is
Correct.
a badger.
Okay, go, Lori.
And so when you think about the badger and it makes its home on the sagebrush prairie, what do you think its niche is or its job is? What role do you think it serves on the prairie?
Go,
It's a
Joliet.
predator.
It is a predator. Awesome. Good job. And so as a predator, how does that help that ecosystem?
It's gonna eat animals that eat grass, so the grass isn't overgrazed.
That's a good one. Oh, that's really good.
How about, what kinds of animals would it eat, do you think?
It would eat like rabbits, probably
Yep,
sage
so-
grouse, mice, small animals, and maybe during the spring it'd eat fawns of antelope and mule deer.
Probably not maybe antelope in mule deer, but you nailed the rest of them. Very good job. I'm going to bring out another animal too.
Okay, let's go to Stevensville for this animal. So Stevensville's turn. What's this animal?
And this is also a predator. You can see its sharp talons and its sharp beak.
Hawk.
It is a hawk. Does anyone know what type of hawk?
Stevensville, do you know what kind of hawk?
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead.
It's a tough one. It's a ferruginous hawk. And
Red
this
tail
is
hawk?
a hawk you...
Red tail.
You're close, and it often are confused as a red-tailed hawk, but it's a ferruginous hawk. And this hawk also makes its home on the sagebrush prairie. And as you can see from its sharp talons and its beak, it has a certain niche, similar to the badger. What do you think that is, Stevensville? What do you think its job is? Its niche?
To be a predator.
To be a predator. And what does it do as a predator? What is its job duties?
It eats fish.
Not much, so much fish, but think of what the badger was eating. What was the badger eating? It's very similar.
Mice, rodents.
Yep, a lot of rodents. Yeah, good job. And it also eats the sage grouse too sometimes. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan because we had predators. They serve a niche on an ecosystem. And then we also have, what do predators eat? What's that called?
They're all answering prey.
Prey, good job. So I'm going to have Ryan talk a little bit about some of the prey on an ecosystem in the sagebrush.
All right. And the prey I'm going to mention are ungulates. What's an ungulate?
Arlie, let's go to you for ungulates.
Hoofed animal.
Yeah, hoofed animal. All right, so this one here, you can see that I'll give you a clue. It has
Arlie?
2 digits.
What's that one?
All right, so this animal is the fastest land animal in North America.
That's a pronghorn antelope.
Pronghorn, exactly. And this is something some people don't even notice, but then you can look at this one right here that has 4 digits. It walks on 2, but what is that?
Have them all over Arlie.
A deer.
It's a deer, yes. Both ungulates you'll find here on the prairie, and they are grazers and browsers that wander throughout that ecosystem. And the last one I was going to throw out is a symbol of fall time in Montana, and it's a large ungulate that we have. And I'll give a vocal clue to, we can pick a school.
I think everybody's going to know this.
All right.
Okay, everybody, what's that?
Oh, it's an
I'll
elk.
say an elk.
All right. So that's a symbol of fall time in Montana. And in the sagebrush prairie, we have a symbol of springtime, and that's dancing what kind of animals?
Sage grouse.
Grouse. All right. So there's different kinds of grouse in Montana. How many different kinds of grouse do we have in Montana? We can have a show of on hands. Do you think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 different kinds of grouse that live in Montana? I'll give you a second, and you just... All right, so the answer is it's 5. So we have,
Still got it right.
there is one of the mountain grouse is the ruffed grouse. We have ruffed grouse in Montana. We have blue or dusky grouse. And then there's spruce grouse. Those are the 3 kinds you'll find in the mountains. And then we'll find sage grouse, 4. And there's one more kind of grouse. Does anyone know what the other kind of prairie grouse is?
Let's unmute your microphone, Stevensville. Do you have any ideas of what the last kind of sage grouse is?
Grouse.
Oh, okay.
Sage grouse?
It's actually the sharp-tailed grouse, and you'll be introduced to that bird here later too. And the important thing especially about sage grouse, is that it is an umbrella species. So, do we have a school that can tell us what an umbrella species is?
You know, I'm thinking Joliet probably has been studying this and could give us a good definition of what an umbrella species is.
Is it going to like cover over something or shade over a different species or something with the grass, something along those lines?
Okay, I am wondering if Arlie agrees or disagrees with that and why. Go Arlie. Let's get some inter-school competition going. What's an umbrella species?
I think I disagree. I have no idea, but I'm going to guess that it's a species that serves as sort of a barrier or protection species to another.
Oh, interesting thoughts. All right. Go for it.
All right, when you hear scientists use that term, umbrella species, what that means is if the sage grouse populations are doing good, it means that all of these other populations of animals, these native animals, they're doing really well too. So it's important that, we conserve sage grouse habitat because all of these other animals are going to benefit from that too. So this is kind of typical sage grouse habitat that we're looking at right here, and we're going to talk about some adaptations of the sage grouse.
So before we start talking about adaptations, Arlie, can you tell me what an adaptation is? Give me a definition of that.
An adaptation is an evolutionary pathway a species will take to be more competitive within a new or changing environment.
Great answer. And then probably a simplified version of that is, if you think about it, animals have unique characteristics on them that help them to survive in a particular ecosystem as well. But great answer. So when you're looking at the sage grouse, and I have a female sage grouse here, what adaptations do you see on it? Who hasn't had a chance?
Let's keep with Arlie for a minute.
Okay, what adaptations, Arlie, do you see on it that would help it to survive in this sagebrush prairie ecosystem?
Definitely its feather coloring, as well as possibly what it eats and how it interacts with others or other species in that environment.
Okay, when you say the feathering coloring, how would that help it to survive, the feathering coloring?
It blends in and allows it to hide from other predators that are out
Yeah.
on the prairie.
Yeah, so you're talking about camouflage, and if you look at this picture behind at me, Ryan's going to point it out, but you can see a few sage grouse in there and how well they're camouflaging in there. So anything else? You just said the feather coloring, and what else was it that you said?
Eat what it eats.
What it eats.
Okay.
Anything else that you can think of?
Perhaps just different behavioral adaptations that allow it to survive.
Okay, good job. So I'm going to have Ryan kind of point out a few things because he's sort of our sage grouse expert.
You guys did a good job of covering a lot of things. Has anyone harvested a grouse? Because you can hunt for grouse in Montana. If anyone's harvested a grouse, hopefully you've taken a look at their feet. They have something unique about each toe. You'll see that it has like a comb-like structure that grows off of it, and it helps its feet become wider in the winter. And those comb-like structures that will protrude off their toes are called pectinations. So they have pectinations on their toes, making their feet wider. How would that help them in the winter months?
Okay, let's go to Joliet and talk to them a little bit about feet and also maybe how they live in the winter. I think that would be interesting. Go, Joliet. What do you think?
So how do their feet, let's restate the question. How do the feet and what Ryan just talked about help them to survive in the winter?
They act like snowshoes and help them walk better over the snow.
Exactly.
Perfect. That's exactly it.
Yeah. This is one tough bird that can survive the nastiest winters that we have in Montana, which we just had one right now. And if you take a look at, start with its legs, you can see that its legs have what all over them?
Feathers.
Feathers.
You're saying.
Yeah, so that feather is all over their legs, and that helps them stay warm. Their legs warm in the wintertime. And then if you take a look at their beak, it's different than a partridge or a pheasant, if you know what that is. They have nasal openings that are open to the elements, and a sage grouse, his nasal opening is covered by feathers. And if you've gone outside when it's super cold, 20 below, 30 below in Montana, you realize that if you pull your jacket up or you have some sort of gaiter to cover up your mouth, it helps you breathe when it's super cold outside. This bird's so tough that to survive blizzards even will bury himself in the snow and can survive that. It's an extremely tough bird with some good adaptations. Someone mentioned the adaptations of what it can eat. And this bird here, obviously, we call it the sage grouse, so it probably eats what?
Sage.
Sagebrush, yes. So it's adapted to eating sagebrush, but it has a unique digestive system. Like many other ground-dwelling birds, it has crop. If you know what a crop is, it'll go out, gather food, and the food all goes down. It'll be in a crop. You can see when a bird has a full crop, it actually protrudes out a little bit. And then as it starts to digest its food will work down into its gizzard. Thumbs up if you guys know what a gizzard is. Thumbs down if you don't. So most ground-dwelling birds with their gizzard, what actually happens is they'll go out and pick up little grit and gravel that ends up in their gizzard, and their gizzard's a strong muscular thing that grinds up their food, which is usually seeds and nuts and things that it finds while out foraging. But the sage grouse doesn't have a muscular gizzard. Early scientists thought they didn't even have a gizzard, but it is not a muscular gizzard, but it's designed for eating softer things like grasses and forbs and sagebrush. In the wintertime, the sage grouse eats about 95% sagebrush leaves, or mostly all sagebrush leaves. So what would happen if there was no sagebrush for the sage grouse?
They would die.
And they would starve to death. All right, so that's most of the special adaptations that this bird has. And the bird that Lori has here is actually a female sage grouse. And what's the word we'd use to describe a female sage grouse? Starts with an H.
Hen.
All right,
That's
hen.
what they're saying.
All right, so we'll grab the next bird here. And this bird here is the male. And what would be the word we'd use to describe the male sage grouse?
Rooster.
Roosters, yes, all right. So which bird is larger, the rooster or the hen?
Okay, Stevensville, let's go to you, and you're going to respond to us by answering some questions about the similarities and the differences in the male and female of this species. Go ahead, Stevensville.
The male is bigger and looks better.
Keep going.
It's bigger.
Keep going.
Okay, any similarities you see?
They're both a bird.
They are both Yay, birds. They're both birds. Okay, thank you, Stevensville.
Thank
Brian,
you.
All right. So some differences that you'll see, there's all these white feathers on the front of the male sage grouse, the rooster, and they call those rough feathers. They're actually, if you were able to feel them, they're really stiff. So the video that you got to see earlier with the sage grouse fighting, they'll be bumping into each other with their chests, and that probably helps as a cushion, kind of like a boxing glove to protect them. But then also this area will all open up and they inflate an air sac that we can't quite see, but these little slits here is where that air sac will open up. But there's a yellow air sac and it can fill up with about 1 gallon of air, and it fills all the way up and makes it really big and visible. So when you're out in this landscape, just like we're looking behind, it is wide open. And if you're big and colorful, birds from a long ways away could see you. And they make a noise that's created by these air sacs releasing the air. So when they release the air out of the air sacs, it makes a noise that sounds kind of like whoop, whoop, woody, whoop.
What is that, Ryan?
Whoop, whoop, woody, whoop.
Whoop, whoop, woody, whoop.
Okay, we're going to have a whoop, whoop, woody, whoop off. All schools on the count of 3 at the top of your lungs. Let's be sage grouse and whoop, whoop, woody, whoop. Okay, 1, 2, 3, hit it. Whoop, whoop, whoop,
Nice. I think you guys are going to be able to call in sage grouse this spring.
We have a virtual lack.
Yeah. Another colorful thing that will pop up, you got to see their eyes above them. It looks like they have eyebrows, but they'll have these colorful feathers right above their eyes. They're called combs that will pop out, and they're yellow colored on the roosters. And then you can see they have these feathers that are sticking off, really thin ones. They're called phyloplumes, and they'll kind of stand up as the bird's strutting too. And just like a turkey fans out and struts around the sage grouse, you can see the male has really long tail feathers compared to the female, which hers are smaller and not as big. They'll spread that out and strut just like a turkey on the lek. All right, so the next thing that we're going to show you is a lek. And we've used the word a couple times here now. What is a lek? Well, my friend Winston, he is going to tell you about leks. And earlier, we talked about there being 2 prairie grouse, and both of them dance on leks. We had the sage grouse, and what was the other one? The sharp-tailed grouse. You'll get to see both of those grouse in this video.
A lek is a place where every spring grouse come from afar to meet and mate. The male sharp-tail dances and prances and shows his display in the hopes of enticing a female or two to come over his way. The sage grouse, however, bubbles away, expanding air in and out to wrangle a hen to his parade. Of course, there is electricity in the air, so fights do occur. But it is the sounds of spring that let all know it is time to breathe. When success is achieved, the males and females go their own ways and plan to meet again next year. Same time, same lek. I'm Winston Greeley, out among Montana's fish, wildlife, and leks.
All right, so now we know what a lek is, and through watching this video, you can see it's an area that's not in the dense sagebrush. It's usually pretty open where they're displaying, and that's so they can see each other. And it's an area that they come back to year after year and year after year. So what I have here is a map, and to get a little idea of where sage grouse live in Montana, let's say we were all able to get on a school bus. All the schools here, we jumped on a school bus together, and we were going to set out to go look for sage grouse this spring. If we got on that school bus and we headed to A on the map here in Montana,
And if you want to type into the chat function, you can do that also. And we're checking that. Okay, Arlie, do you think there's sage grouse in A?
Oh, specifically. Possibly.
Possibly. Oh, hedge in your
Yeah,
bet.
there's a pretty
Okay.
good chance we could see some sage grouse if we
Okay.
went down where A is. And we all jump in the school bus and we head to B.
What do you think, Joliet? Is B sage grouse country?
You betcha.
Oh yeah, there's a pretty good chance we could see sage grouse there. And now we're heading down to C. Is there a pretty good chance we might find sage grouse down at C? Thinking about it? We would, yeah, there's a pretty good chance we could find some sage grouse down by C too. And now our last trip up to D, would we be seeing sage grouse? South of where we're doing our inspired classroom meeting today.
In the Bitterroot. I'm thinking Stevensville says no.
All right, probably not. We're probably not going to see sage grouse there. So this is a map of the leks in Montana, and what you can see, the red represents the sage grouse leks that are active right now, and then you can see that the other colors are leks that are no longer active. All right, here's a map of the sage grouse distribution in the United States, and it shows their current range and the historical range. So long ago, there used to be millions of sage grouse out on the sagebrush plains, and not as much today. Their populations and their areas declined by almost 50%. So, do we have any ideas why we've lost this range with the sage grouse?
Okay, I think this is a good one because we've got high schools on pretty much right now. So Arlie, in your studies, what have you learned about habitat and sage grouse habitat? Why do you think the change has occurred? Go ahead, Arlie.
Probably due to a change in climate, perhaps habitat loss, differing environments, things like that.
Okay, I'm going to go to Joliet. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Urbanization.
Urbanization.
Urbanization, they added to it. What do you think, Ryan? Are they close?
In areas that can be a problem. And I think we're all hitting different topics that are definitely part of the problem. The main two reasons, it's habitat loss, which we already mentioned, and fragmentation. And what would be an example, you think, of something that might fragment the habitat?
Farming.
Farming could be one.
Yep.
Someone mentioned urbanization, especially in Colorado. That's a real big issue, as there's areas where the sage grouse they inhabit, and there's housing developments going up, and that's a really big problem. Roads, oil and gas development, those could all be things that fragmented the landscape. Habitat loss, we look at this area where there is no longer sage grouse, and years and years ago, kind of between the 40s and the 70s, there was a lot of sagebrush removal going on, and it was considered to be an indicator of poor range health, and the sagebrush was actually removed through plowing, and they'd chain it. They would put chains between dozers and drag it, and they also sprayed sagebrush, and millions of acres of sagebrush were removed, and that also making the habitat which the grouse could inhabit smaller and smaller. So,
Cool. Good discussion, guys.
So we have a graph here in recent years. We can see starting in 2002, this is the estimated sage grouse in Montana, and you can see in about 2007 it took a dive, and by the year 2014 it had declined by about 50%, the sage grouse. And during that time, landowners and people at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and other federal agencies got together, and there was lots and lots of conservation efforts put towards sage grouse, and that helped our sage grouse population rebound. And although the population from historical highs is dropped significantly, we're happy that our populations are at this time pretty healthy, though, and we're pretty excited about that.
And I just saw a question come in, and you may have answered this, but how are the sage grouse important to the environment, and how will their decrease affect it?
Oh. So when we were talking about niches earlier with sage grouse, the sage grouse has a narrow niche. We were talking about how it eats the sagebrush leaves. It'll eat insects and things like that. And like Lori is hinting here, it is a what kind of species?
Umbrella.
Umbrella species. So if the sage grouse populations are doing poor, usually all of the other native populations of wildlife end up suffering from that too. So the main decline always when we have habitat animals populations declining is problems with the habitat. And when there's habitat, the sage grouse is an indicator species. So as its populations decline, usually other wildlife we see their populations declining too.
Great questions. Keep them coming.
All right, we have a short video here. In your guys' second live event, you'll actually be visiting with a biologist. But this actually gives you a little look into how the biologists go out and monitor sage grouse.
The best time of day to count the sage grouse on the lek so that you don't disturb them is to get here before daybreak. By the time it gets light enough to count, the birds are used to me sitting there in the truck, and so I'll stay long enough until I get a good count of the males, which are pretty easy to see, and then the females, which are much more difficult to see.
Just like the sound of a bugling elk announces that fall is on its way, spring is announced by sage grouse, displaying on their ancient leks found in the wide-open sagebrush plains of the American West.
Sage grouse are an interesting species. We refer to them as having a narrow niche. That is, that they're very specifically adapted to the sagebrush grassland habitats. As a whole, the sage grouse has declined in some states up to 50% or more. In Montana, we're fortunate that we have still vast areas of sagebrush grasslands. One of the reasons is the fact that we have a lot of traditional ranching in the state.
As summer progresses, the birds will seek out areas that are less dense with sagebrush and have high succulent forb content to them. And then in the wintertime, they'll seek out areas of denser, taller sagebrush.
The sage grouse doesn't have a muscular gizzard with grit in it, and they can't digest hard foods like seeds. And so in the wintertime, the sage grouse's diet is made up of the leaves and shoots of the sage. This is Mike Gurnett, out among Montana's Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
So a question we get quite often too is what can youth do to help sage grouse? And I have a picture here, and obviously these aren't real sage grouse, but this was an example of youth getting involved in trying to help sage grouse. And this is actually down in Wyoming. They have a little more oil and gas development than we have here in Montana, and you can see in the background there's an oil rig there. There was a lek that was near that oil rig, and they were afraid that the sage grouse would abandon that lek. So some middle school kids actually made these sage grouse decoys and were trying to draw the lek further away from the oil rig, and they used recordings of sage grouse on the lek making the noise that you guys made earlier and made these decoys. And they were successful at drawing some of the males away from that area to establish their lek in a little different area too. And also, more than anything, it just raised an awareness and appreciation for sage grouse in the school and the community too. And people started stepping up to see what they could do for sage grouse.
You know, Ryan, let's pause for just a minute because I've got some questions coming in, and I bet Arlie and Joliet also have some. And possibly Stevensville's in again. So let's go ahead to Arlie. What questions do you have so far about sage grouse in particular?
Arlie, my question is, do any other animals use leks?
Ooh, good question.
We have predators that you guys mentioned before. They're not dancing on the leks, but they'll come to the leks to look for prey, being the sage grouse. The grouse are the species, are prairie grouse, are who would visit these leks and display on them. And so in the manner that they're using it, it would be just the grouse.
Okay, thank you. How about Joliet? Do you have any sage grouse questions?
We have one right here, ma'am.
Okay.
Were there once sage grouse in the Bitterroot Valley?
Yeah, when we look back at the distribution map in the before, many of the areas that the sage grouse have disappeared are some of those sagebrush prairies that are between the mountains in western Montana.
How many were there, Ryan, at one point, do you think, roughly?
Oh, and they would describe as there being millions of sage grouse on the sagebrush prairies historically. But today, like the numbers that we just looked at earlier, it's in the the thousands.
Great. That was a question we had on the chat function too, was what's the total population now and what was it 50 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you answered that one. Great. Great question.
So we have another example of youth getting out and helping sage grouse. And there's a few schools that I saw that were in this session. Those kids that were in Circle and even down at Joliet. You may, exploring out through the sagebrush prairie, encountered markers that are hanging on the fences. And they're going to talk a little bit about a program they're doing to help sage grouse.
In conservation, sometimes the most simple action can make the biggest difference. Sage grouse live on the sage steppe grasslands of the American West. They truly are a remarkable bird, but they've fallen into hard times. Their populations over the last 4 or 5 decades have been drastically declining.
They're closely associated with sagebrush grasslands, and there's precious little of it left. We have altered the habitat in ways that sage grouse don't seem to do as well. We've turned sagebrush into cultivated farm ground. We've added transmission lines. We've added roads. We've added fences.
Fences, which are needed for ranching, cause problems for a lot of different species in the sagebrush ecosystem, but particularly for sage grouse. They live mostly on the ground, but when they fly low and don't always look where they're going.
There can be fence collisions when sage grouse fly into fences, and that can be a source of direct mortality.
And that's where we come in. Fence marking has been recognized by federal and state agencies as an essential step for protecting sage grouse, but no one is doing this on a large scale. The National Wildlife Federation is working with Youth Job Corps crews in Montana on projects to conserve this remarkable species. One of National Wildlife Federation's keystone points is getting kids outside in nature. And so this project really provides such a great opportunity to combine our conservation work while involving teens from various job corps from around the state. On this map, all these red lines are known fences. Our job is to go mark that entire teal line there that's highlighted.
Coming here just gave me a new vision on, what's actually out here, what I can do to help. And, we met up with Haley, and she's teaching us a lot about the environment out here and the sage grouse particularly. Operation Sage Grouse.
That's right, Operation Sage Grouse. Unless we actually step in and do something to help the sage grouse populations, there's a good chance that they'll be put on the endangered species list. Put flags on every 3 feet or so, you guys, and they will make the fence more visible. By, just adding a small plastic tab, we can prevent the risk of collision by 70–80%. There aren't that many opportunities like this to really do hands-on conservation and get the kids outside.
Montana Conservation Corps holds that very dearly, that we're able to get teens outside, because it's something that this day and age may not happen very often if we aren't giving people the chance to experience that and to live life outdoors.
The kids, I think, really grow from the time that they spend out here and makes them really glad to go home to take a shower. 3 more miles, you guys. Just kidding. What really is going to save the species is conserving land, trying to create large tracts of intact habitat. But that takes a lot of time. And so fence marking offers an immediate benefit to the bird while those longer-term conservation practices are taking place. If we work together, every high-risk fence in Montana can be marked. I think sage grouse deserve a fighting chance, and certainly that's what we're trying to do with this work, is really just give them a fighting chance.
Okay, I have some questions coming in that it would be great to answer, because I'm not sure when they have to leave to go to other classes. So, do other types of grouse join sage grouse on the lek?
It can happen in certain kinds of habitats where the sharp-tailed grouse and sage grouse are using habitats. Sometimes you will have sharp-tailed grouse that wander into these areas, but the sage grouse are definitely they're bigger and stronger, but it has happened that there's been hybrid grouse too. And actually the biologist that you guys will be visiting with in the second live event, he has actually encountered that and can speak in better detail too.
Great. How old do they have to be to mate?
Ooh. You know, I'm not sure. That would be a great question for the biologist too, to know when they're sexually mature.
I'm going to challenge that student that asked that to do some research, and they can come up with that answer to the question. Great. Okay. Keep going.
All right, so that was a great organization to get involved with, the Youth Job Corps too. And eBird is a citizen scientist website that you can get involved with. You can put it on your phone or a tablet, and you can go out and actually do surveys for birds, and is a great way to not only look for the sage grouse, but if you were looking for all these other species of birds, which there's about 300 species of birds that use this ecosystem, you could enter your observations if you were sure of what you were seeing, and the scientists use this information too. And actually in Montana, there's a video, because our time's a little short, we're going to skip over, but you could watch on Fish, Wildlife, and Parks YouTube. We've actually gifted some sage grouse to Canada in areas where the sage grouse has disappeared to help them reestablish their populations, because ours are healthy right now. And also in North Dakota, you can see there's a picture here. They use decoys to keep birds that they were gifted from Wyoming in an area. And the decoys, similar to before, they moved around and made noise, and they tried to keep those birds in their habitat, bring them back to areas where they had disappeared.
And this is a project that I'm pretty excited about. It's called the Sagebrush in Prisons Project, and we have Montana State Prison that's been involved with it, as well as the Montana's Women's Prison. And what these guys and women are doing is they are doing a lot like what you are. They're learning a lot about sagebrush, learning a lot about sage grouse, and they're helping to grow sagebrush seedlings to plant later or restore areas that are missing a lot of that sagebrush. And they sort of become experts in their field. And then the next one, and you'll be learning a lot about this group as you get into your challenge, and I encourage you to take a look at this website, because we have a group of people. It's called the Sage Grouse Initiative, and it's a combination of landowners, it's a combination of people who are working on conservation, maybe groups that are not maybe state and federal agencies, but they're really excited about helping the sage grouse as well. And we're all working together to try to come up with some solutions and to provide habitat and maybe even restore some of these areas. And you'll learn more about it as you look into this website. It's a big part of your challenge.
Do we have a few final questions? Let's just check in with Arlie and Joliet, because I know they're still on. Arlie, do you have any final questions for Ryan or Lori?
Got it. What age do sage grouse reach sexual maturity, and how big are their clutches?
Oh. All right. Well, they'll have up to a dozen, maybe young. And to speak on how old they are when they reach sexual maturity, I think it's about 4 years. But during the second event, that'll be a better question for our biologist that will visit with you.
And that biologist will be Scott Hemmer, and we'll also have Mark Cloker, who are both from Glasgow, and they work with these sage grouse on a pretty regular basis.
Great. One more question from Arlie.
I have a classmate who would like to know if they're related to peacocks.
Oh, interesting.
Oh. Well, I had someone ask the other day, he saw a mounted sage grouse at the education center, and he called it a dumb chicken. And there's many things the sage grouse has been called, but it shouldn't be called a dumb chicken. We've heard them called fool hens. We've heard them called, they've been called sage cocks, sage hens, all these different names. The sage grouse is the name that we use now. They're all part of a group called the galliforms, and those are the large ground-dwelling birds. And the domestic chickens that maybe some of you have are also in that order, and they're from Asia, actually. They're jungle chickens. So I would say if you kind of followed all that back, I think the peacock lands in that similar order of the large ground-dwelling birds. So
I'm going to challenge that classmate to look that up and figure it out. That's great. Joliet, do you have any final questions?
We were wondering what would be the effect on the ecosystem if we lost sage grouse.
All right. like we were talking before, the effect would be felt by all of the other species that maybe would prey. Maybe they prey on sage grouse and that's a food source for them. The sage grouse eat the insects. All of a sudden you wouldn't have sage grouse out there eating those insects. And because they are an umbrella species, just like we talked about before, when their population's doing well, the others are too. So I think we would see, if the sage grouse disappeared, I think we would see other animals really suffering too.
Great. One more question from Joliet.
How many leks are in Carbon County?
Ooh, well, you can actually go back and the map we showed you earlier with the leks, I'm sure that you could check that out and count that up and get an exact answer of that.
Would you like us to come to your school and in May from the lek? Do you guys have leks next to you, Joliet?
Looking at the map, I believe we do, and I think we would be interested in you guys coming to us.
Yeah, if you headed to the southeast.
Maybe we can talk to you about that later.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great, Stacy, thanks. Okay, Stevensville, any last question?
We have 2 questions, please.
Great.
How would you protect the sage grouse if they started going extinct?
Things that people are doing, hopefully to keep it off of the endangered species list. There's been lots of work and a lot of money that's been put into this over the last years, and you see that Ryan showed that map and there was that spike. So some of those things are habitat restoration, cutting back on the fragmentation, looking at types of grazing that are done out there, and we've had a lot of different people that are making that effort. So this will be posted later online too, and so will all those videos, so you might want to take a look at those again as well.
Good, thank you. Another question, Stevensville?
Do sage grouse have one lek, or do they have multiple meeting places?
Oh, they'll gather on this one spot. I don't think they visit multiple leks.
You might want to answer that by how they migrate too, poor things.
Oh, so we've had questions that have come across asked how sage grouse will migrate. And like you might think of ducks and geese flying long distances, most of the migrating that a sage grouse does is walking.
A lot of walking.
Yeah, and the longest migration of sage grouse is actually here in Montana. Some of our birds from Canada have migrated down to the CMR Wildlife Refuge in central Montana, making a migration of 150 miles.
On those little bird legs.
Yeah, and that's in the wintertime. And they've been doing a lot of research lately on and around these leks, so I would definitely ask the biologist about if they'd seen grouse visiting multiple leks in their experiences. So I'm kind of wrapping this up. We've talked about some of the impacts to the ecosystem and other animals that there would be if we lost sage grouse, but also just think about, if you have sage grouse where you live, if they disappeared, your kids and grandkids would never be able to experience them again. And that is something that if you like to hunt sage grouse, you'd never get to do again. If you like to visit the lek with your family and see them displaying, or even just hearing them while they're out working out on the prairie, would never happen again. So I think because this was my pick for the wildest place in Montana, it would lose a little wild if we didn't have the sage grouse there and the other native species. So I put a quote at the top: the Wild West wouldn't be so wild without its native wildlife.
And we're really excited that you're going to take part in this challenge, because we're interested in hearing what you have to report back to us at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We're going to share it with the people that we work with. We're going to have people taking a look at what you come up with, and you might come up with some great solutions yourself in ways that we can help the sage grouse. And thanks for joining us today.